We are on. Welcome everyone to the Africa Dialogue on COVID-19 and the future of social protection. My name again is Simon Nongo. I'm from Zimbabwe, but I also represent Southern Africa on the board of the Africa Platform for Social Protection. The structure of the webinar dialogue, as you know, is that in our first session, we heard how different groups have been affected and how they coped with the difficulties of COVID-19. Then in session 2, last week, we heard from the ILO and the governments of Kenya and Nigeria about the crucial importance of social protection. But also do note that there is still a lot of room for growth. Today, we will talk about the visions of the various players and commitments to expand social protection after coming out of this COVID-19 crisis. In all, we have 5 countries that are participating, with Ghana, Morocco, and Malawi presenting, while Burkina Faso and Botswana may wish to participate in the question and answer session. The African Union Commission, as well as the East African Commission, as well as the national and international civil society organizations, will complete the roundtable for our discussion today. Without taking too much time, because it's not going to be possible to introduce each participant before they actually start, I will just go straight to the names in the order in which the presentations are going to be made. We will start off with Mr. Oumar Diop, Senior Labor Officer at the African Union, presenting frameworks and strategies on social protection in building forward better and expanding social protection. Mr. Diop, please, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Nongo, moderator. And as he said, I'm Oumar Diop, working as the African Union Commission. Currently, I am the coordinator of the AU-ILO IOM joint program on labor migration governance for development and integration. And I also work on the portfolio of labor, employment, and social security. So can you display my presentation, Karin? So that I can start. I have 10 minutes. Karin, can you help here? Hello, Karin.
Hello, Karin. The projection, is it available? Florian? Florian, do you know if Karin is online?
Let me just, Brian, are you here? Brian? No, just to Karin. Okay, so just let me just start now to make the presentation. I will talk about vulnerabilities, and then talk about the AU policy responses and strategies to cater for protection, and then I will talk about the COVID-19 impact on social protection and how the AUC is dealing with this one. Regarding the vulnerabilities, the AU vulnerability and vulnerable groups of population in Africa The African Union is taking the life cycle approach and dealing with inequalities as well. Inequalities in terms of income, access, in terms of access to social services, and in terms also of access to social facilities. So the main group that the AU is taking care in terms of policy framework are the children, the youth, and the workers in the informal, the labor market, and its vulnerability and the vulnerabilities of workers, particularly the workers in the informal economy and in the rural sector. We have also persons living with disability and older persons as well. So how it now work in terms of policy? What do we have as a policy framework to take care of these categories of vulnerable person and to respond also to the vulnerability of these category of persons? We have the aspiration 1 of the Agenda 2063 and the Social Agenda 2063. The Agenda 2063, aspiration 1 is about promoting the welfare and the well-being of the African citizen. It goes through goals and through also targets which are put in terms of decent work, in terms of social security coverage for all persons, and including the workers in the informal economy and the rural sector. So this is aspiration 1, where it is a home of social security, social protection in Africa, among the 7 aspirations of the Agenda 2063. And now we just developed a social agenda 2063, which is combining and putting together on the same policy framework all the social security and social protection related targets of the Agenda 2063. So this is the master plan, I should say, the blueprint for Africa in terms of promoting social protection in Africa. I mean the Social Agenda 2063. And we have the charter for the children. I mentioned the category of persons. For the children, we have the charter on the right and welfare of the children. And this is a very comprehensive, legal instruments, which is implemented by the committee of the African experts on the right and welfare of the children. And it has several provisions, which is look at, getting the right of the children promoted and protected in Africa. It can be education, it can be health, and it can be also avoiding, or even not avoiding, but eradicating child labor, for example. We have the WAGA plus 10 policy system. I say system because it encompasses a declaration and a plan of action on employment, poverty, eradication, and inclusive development, which has 6 key criteria. One of the key criteria is about social protection and productivity. And here we have also, I mentioned the social protection plan for the informal economy and rural workers, what we call spire work. And this one is very specific in terms of facilitating, promoting access of workers in the informal economy to social protection. In Africa, on average in Africa, it is between 10 and 15% of workers who are covered by the contributory social security systems. And this is a situation which we want to really correct in Africa. And we have the protocol on free movement of persons, GLMP. This one we have provision for protection of the migrant workers in Africa, and you can see the specific situation of migrant informal workers in Africa. Then we go to the person living with disability, which are protocol, older person protocol also, and the youth and women protocol. You have 2, one separate for each of them. and the protocol on social security, the draft protocol on social security and social protection and social security. This one was adopted by the Conference of Ministers of Labor in Abidjan sometime in 2019, December. And it is going through now the next step. The next step will be the Conference of the Ministers of Legal Affairs, and then it will go to the summit for adoption. Now I come to the COVID-19 effect. COVID-19 effect, the AU developed what we call a AU comprehensive response to socioeconomic and environmental impact of COVID-19. This document is going to be adopted to be considered by the forthcoming STC of the Ministers of Social Development, Labor and Employment in October 2021. And the document, I just give here the structure of the document because it is a very comprehensive one. We have analysis of cross-cutting issues like gender and family. Family is very important when you talk about social protection. Most of the time, we don't really evoke the family as a leverage for social security. It is very important for us to think, to bring on board the family as an important vehicle for social protection and social security. And this is sometimes just forgotten. And we have this comprehensive response is developed along the pillars of the Social Agenda 2063. And the structure for each of the pillar, we have one section on the envisioned outcome, what we are aiming at for this pillar. The challenge to the family in Africa in view of COVID-19. So we describe what are the challenges under each pillar also. The policy indicators to mitigate the impact of COVID-19 on the family in Africa. We also develop the policy indicators for each of the pillars. We have also another section which talk about the immediate relief action for vulnerable families. And this is for every one of the pillar of the Agenda 2063. We define the immediate relief actions to be undertaken. We also define the medium to long-term actions to be undertaken. And we also go to cross-cutting and intersectoral and collaboration required for each of the pillar. And we define the key actors who are concerned by the implementation of the action, short-term, medium-term, and immediate one. And lastly, the last part of the document for each of the pillars talk about organized crime threats, which could have impact on the implementation, on the achievement of the implementation of the action which are defined. So now I would like to talk quickly about the financing. I know it was 10 minutes now. The financing of social security is a high concern for Minister of Finance. Just to say that in 2016, some 4 years ago, they during the conference of STC of the Minister of Finance, they adopted two resolutions, one on the financing social security and social protection, and the other one on financing employment policies. This indicate clearly how important it is for the Minister of Finance to really make progress in terms of ensuring sustainable financing of social protection policies in Africa. It is very important that they get to that commitment in terms of adopting a resolution. As they said, from the need for equitable fiscal policy and efficient and transparent budgetary allocation to support social protection expenditure as a means of reducing inequality, eradicating poverty, and building social cohesion. This is a commitment of the Minister of Finance. And it gives us then a very good support, a very good ground to really move toward improving the financing of social protection in Africa. And then there was a commitment here in terms of getting to develop national and regional stakeholders to be part of it and to develop strategy and policies incorporating social protection and social security targets of the first 10-year implementation plan of the Agenda 2063. and also developing nationally appropriate spending targets for social protection floors and social security, undertake to increase the mobilization of effective domestic resources through tax reforms and in innovative forms of financing, and also supporting necessary reform to enhance technical infrastructure and institutional capacities of those ministries responsible for social protection for national dialogue, including the employers. So this is my presentation, which has two parts. One part is on policy commitment, and the other part just to also talk about the financing of social protection policies in Africa. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Diop, for that presentation. We did try to keep to the time limit. And as a result of this pressure on time, I'm not going to spend time trying to summarize what you said, lest it dilutes everything and, most important, takes away the time. I'm now going to go straight to the roundtable presentations by governments, as well as CSOs and intergovernmental organizations like the East African community. So I have the honor to invite Dr. Rita Owusu-Amankwah, the Ministry of Gender, Children and Social Protection in Ghana. Madam, if you could proceed, please. Madam Amankwah. Hello. Is Madam Amankwah online? Is Secretariat online? Whoa. Hello.
They're saying that she's not online.
Oh, she's not
on
online.
The chats. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so may we then proceed to the next presentation? Madam Naima Hirosh, I hope I get the pronunciation correct, Head of Bilateral Social Protection Programs in Morocco. Madame, vous avez le parole.
Merci, monsieur le modérateur. J'espère que vous m'entendez. Est-ce que vous m'entendez, monsieur le modérateur?
Oui, on vous entend.
OK.
OK.
Sorry.
Donc, je me présente.
So I will begin by introducing myself. I am Naima Roche. I am chair of the Bilateral Social Protection with the Ministry of Labor and Professional Insertion in Morocco. It's a privilege for me to share together with you in this webinar dedicated to the social protection and to many other efforts that are done to protect the social, the public and social world. I would want to share with you a brief presentation on this matter.
Please.
Je crois, j'ai pu, pardon.
I think that.
Oui. Oui. Donc,
Here is my presentation. I will try to share
C'est relatif aux références nationales et
three major areas. The first one has to do with the national references and international on extension of social protection in Morocco and the right to use it for social protection. And secondly, I shall be sharing on the efforts that are put in place in order for that to be a reality. And after that, we shall have to talk about the acceleration of the same. Afterward, we shall talk about the impact of COVID. And finally, I shall also talk about the actions and actions in line with the reality of COVID in Morocco. So as national references, the references are the demarcation that we have done, considering the various speeches that we have had. With the opening of the legislative year 2019 rather, these helped us to move ahead towards the realization of the social protection in Morocco. And so if the Constitution of Morocco speaks of equality amongst men and women, and so therefore everybody has got access to health, both male and female, according to our Constitution. Article 19 of our Constitution mentions that, and also a government program that provides extension of the cover of social work. I will mention the Convention 102, according to the the International Service of Work. I should also speak about the work that took place in Morocco 2019, and also the recommendation 202 on the scale for social protection, and the program and development programs in our year towards the year 2030, and the various kinds of declaration of, according to the International Organization of Work or Labor, and how we can have a durable labor. And so after that, I will share a brief overview of protection in Morocco from various regimes, i.e. the employed people and also the non-salaried worker, the structured and unstructured institutions. And so I shall then speak about the enterprise reformation, implementation of the work in favor of those in salaries, the reform of the work in the year 2015, and then the extension of the work according to the ministry and the service work, as was discussed on 1st January 2015, and also the extension of the cover for those who are sick and students and teachers in high school, in university sectors, and also public law related to the assurance for the sick and obligations that need to be put in place for the pensions and the profit for those who are working and the salaries, and also the implementation of the cover for the social cover for the people who are working maybe from the year 2019, and also the adding or the addition of the amount for family allocation since the year 2019. Those are the very last one, of course, in the year 2019. That is why, especially in the area of the private sector. And here, this is a circular of the government that was published on 30th of March 2020, which was speaking of two committees, a pilot committee for policies in order to have a good medical law, and also how to improve the services and also communicate interministerial communications, and the preparation for technical studies in order to have a better preparation for the meeting, for the piloting meeting that is coming, in order to have a unified approach towards the extension of public protection at the national level. And so there are three commissions that were put in place. We have a commission for the governance and various social programs and commission for the cover for sickness and also the target. And so we also participated in the year 2018, first meeting was on 12th and 13th of November 2018. We had consultations and gathering with all the economical actors, administrations, and various other sectors that are concerned in this matter. They all came together to constitute a platform for a way forward towards social protection in Morocco. And the second part for the generalization, here is a little chart that will help us to have a clear understanding of the active population in Morocco. The active population in Morocco is divided by the salaried, and of course the structure is already put in place. About 80% of the people and the people who are not salaried in the structure is existent, and we have put in place a structure to follow up on their realities in order to cover all those ones. So we shall see after this. We will see other stuff that we shared in the year 2019 and 2020, and so for the salaried private sector, this is a social cover since the year 50s, and then the cover has been growing with the numbers of those who are salaried has grown up to about 4 million, and so with about 80% cover of the salaried. Now, the realization of the salaried, we did improve the process of coordination, and we put in place institutions and training with private state companies and various other institutions, i.e. the Directorate of Tax, and also how should we fight against the fraud, which is a problem, a serious problem, especially with the salary. There's also the legal framework at the national level in order to revise the law for the people who are working, and this is ongoing. And there is also the generalization of the representation of the organizations, especially on the area of the management of health and various institutions that allows a proximity of maybe private sectors, and also there is matter to do with proximity of institutions, i.e. putting in place mobile services, especially in the rural area. There is also matter to do with the modernization of the work and such declarations, and with the payment, and also a platform with COVID-19. Of course, we put this in the declaration with contacts with various institutions, of course, and finally, the justice, the law, to follow up on some of these things. So what are the processes at the national level as a law that gathers and checks on the procedures. And for the domestic workers, I would want to say that the implementation of the cover for this category in the year 2019 and now, we have about 3,000 plus who are now covered. Now, for the non-salaried workers, the people represent about 40% of the active population. And so the conversation continues with various professional categories. And also we have put in place the legislative system for assurance, medical cover, of course, for various people. And so now the category for those who are covered is the therapeutists, women in the health sector, and various others. And so there was a publication for the same
Donc, il est fait. Donc,
in order to allow and facilitate implementation of the law in effect. And so the process of regeneration of those categories has been really accelerated so that the calendar that was produced should be well followed on social protection, i.e. effective generation in a general position since the year 2020. Also in the last generation of the medical health, considering the people who are not employed and while working. We, of course, have some work that needs to be done in the profit of others, especially the independent people who look for space to serve. So there is matter of there's matter to do with accountability, of course, from various contributions, professional contributions that are coming together. And so we need to consider the contributions that are dedicated to the finance general office. There are also contributions for the medical cover basic. Of course, this will be transferred to the bank. The second convention, of course, had to do with the truth. If there was a form of relationship in between there, and also we need to check about 1.8% instead of the work. Now, there is now the law number 09.21 on the social protection. It is a quinquennial plan as a reference plan for the next 5 years. Of course, it helps to check the various obligatories, various laws rather, and the reality of the work since 2021, 2022, and also there is the allocation for families and the various other realities in families in 2020 and going forward. There is a matter of finances, the management of the programs according to the work that was put in place by 2021-2025 with about 51 billion of dirham, of course, with the Ministry of Finance, which is to gain for the work. And of course, with this, we need to have a pillar that contributes, or especially on having people who can facilitate the management of the sale. And so we have we have one for national solidarity, and so we sometimes if we have people who don't have the capacity to participate financially, and so this can help. And so this is the summary chart. So we'll need about a billion dirham. 20 billion for family work, 16 for retirement. Now, for the future reforms, of course, there will be modification of certifications for adaptation. There are new texts for the cover of every other professional categories. There is also matter of structural reality in order to put in place the health system in order to go ahead with a new system of health, and then the reform of the system and the compensation for the improvement of the target categories eligible for the aid, and then the operation for the registry for social unit, and also the development from the government and management. This is a target at the national level and also at the political level, and also from the the governance rather. There's also development on the structural level in governance. There is improvement of pilot mechanism, and then there is the sum total of reforms, structural reforms, which has to do with the implementation of new systems in the health sector, the reform of the sector, and the compensation. Speaking of actions that were put in place considering COVID-19, let me speak of the creation of a special fund, which was the very first action that was made in order to identify the measures that needs in order to follow up on, to make some follow-up. will need support and many other work towards resiliency. And so considering the salaried, I think it's part of a law which is against the human right. There is also matter to do with family education, with the work, be it formal or informal. People need to know that there is a support. There's a support. And so with COVID-19 entry, we have about 5 sectors that were affected, of course, with 16 billion euro that were put in place to facilitate the work. And for the workers, there is also suspension of other charges on social fund. There's also the implementation of moratory, rather, of credits, of course, from the bank. And also there is much to do with guarantee and the scales for the declaration of the annual revenue. And so there is also a support.
Okay, some problem with the program. Please. Time.
And so there's
plus de l'indemnité forfaitaire, des allocations familiales et continuer à rester au régime de l'assurance. Ça concerne le tourisme, la restauration, les traiteurs éventuels, les parcs et jeux et attractions, la presse, l'industrie culturelle et créative, les salles de sport et les salles de sport privées. Donc, cet appui a été prolongé jusqu'à le 30 juin 2021. Donc, en conclusion, cette crise de a permis de mettre en relief les liens qui unissent non seulement mais aussi le Maroc avec
tourism, press, culture, sports area, and but various people in the continent of Africa. And of course, it also helped us to put in place some structures that help in the social work and with the social protection, i.e. the people in the country and all over the world. This crisis has also helped us to develop some platform to help acceleration of work in the services and also the improvement of governance and program in many other works and ways for targets and some rational work, and also the acceleration of the social cover in the universe from a universal position. Thank you very much.
Oh, okay, thank you very much, Madam Irush. Then we now have to get to the next speaker, or do we have Dr. Rita Amankwah available now? Hello? Is Dr. Amankwah available? Apparently not. So may we proceed to Madam Twea, Principal Economist in the Ministry of Health and Population in Malawi. Madam, may you proceed to make your presentation, please, and to try as much as possible to keep to the 5-minute limit. Thank you. Madam Twea? Hello, Madam Twea? Can anyone hear anything?
I think she's not online, Simon.
Oh, she's not online. So may we pass on to the next presenter? Thank you. In that case, let's proceed to Mr. Maurice Tayebwa, Coordinator of Youth and Children at the East African Community Secretariat. Mr. Tayebwa, please, you have the floor.
Yes, hello, good afternoon. I'm called Maurice Tayebwa.
Mr. Tayebwa, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Okay, if Mr. Tayebwa is not available.
Simon, Mr. Tayebwa is available and we can hear him.
I couldn't hear him. Please, Mr. Tayebwa, proceed. Thank you.
Yes. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm called Maurice Tayebwa from the East African Community Secretariat, a regional organization for East African countries, Rwanda, Burundi, Kenya, Tanzania, Uganda, and South Sudan.
I can't hear Mr. Tayebwa. Can others hear him?
Yes, we can hear him.
Okay, so it's only on my side.
Yes, sorry, the facilitator, I think.
There seems to be a breakdown on my side.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, so I will proceed since I just have 5 minutes. I will not be able to present because I realize if I make a presentation.
Please proceed.
Yes, sure. I may not have the discipline to follow my presentation, so I'll just speak offhand. As I mentioned, we are the Secretariat of the Intergovernmental Organization for 6 partner states in East Africa. And I'm actually in the Gender and Community Development Department, which coordinates the Sector Council of Ministers responsible for gender, youth, children, social protection, and community development. Yeah, so social protection and the ESC is looked at in different dimensions. There is a component on social security that also lies with the labor sector. Then for us, we look at the general social protection, vulnerability, and how it relates to the mainstreaming of different population groups, and also response in terms of insurance, but also social assistance programs. And our main work as a secretariat is coordinate what happens at the different, within the different countries at national level. And so we have different engagements with the partner states, but most especially we engage through the Sector Council on social protection, and also the Council of Ministers. And we have had different approaches on social protection. On social security, we have a council directive on portability of social security benefits in the ESC. This is a long time directive which was first passed by the 19th Sector Council, 19th Council in 2010. So we have a decision that has not been implemented since 2010 on social security benefits. It has been hampered by many issues, including the conducting of actuarial studies within the ESC, but also to have discussions with social security institutions on harmonization of the different approaches within the ESC. And then within the health department, there was also a discussion on the social portability bill, which went to the East African Legislative Assembly. And also the health department has worked on social health protection, and they have conducted a physical analysis for universal health and HIV coverage. They have a regional health sector investment priorities framework, and also resource mobilization strategy for universal health and HIV coverage. And within our social sectors, we are guided by Article 39 of the Common Market Protocol on Development of Social Policies. We have also had several discussions, even with partners. I'm happy to see our colleagues in the African Platform for Social Protection. We work closely with them on especially mainstreaming of social protection in the different action plans that we've developed, especially HIV-sensitive social protection, child-sensitive social protection. And we've worked on the development strategies for the ESC and the other development frameworks to mainstream social protection within the legal, but also the programmatic agenda of the ESC. So there is a lot which I cannot discuss in 5 minutes, but related to COVID, with the health department, COVID has become an eye-opener on how, for example, the vulnerable groups have several challenges, whether with infections, but also with responding to COVID, and also we've seen many resource gaps, including the challenge with the health workforce, but also the social service workforce, but also domestic financing. And now most of the COVID interventions are actually reliant on donor funding. But we also have seen the challenge on social security, especially for workers. For countries which locked down, workers had to lose jobs, and we've seen a different whole dimension that most of the social security systems, whether formal or informal, were not ready for such an emergency. And therefore, at the ESC, there has been a COVID response plan that was developed to respond generally on health issues, but also social protection. And in our sector, we've also developed a COVID response plan for children, youth, and young people in the region. All these documents were presented last week to the Sector Council with the ministers responsible for social protection, and we got guidance. We wanted to develop a regional policy on social protection, and we were guided that going forward, we should harmonize all our approaches and support each other. So we were advised that to have a regional policy on social protection, we need to first conclude that pending annex that looks at portability of social security benefits within the ESC. So that will be, going forward, that will be our concerted effort within the 3 sectors that work on social protection. That is the social affairs, gender sector, the labor department, and the health department. And then we also, the ministers also looked at the COVID response plan, and did realize that we need to update it because it was developed in 2020. A lot has changed, but also include specific vulnerable populations, especially persons with disabilities, older persons, and persons affected by HIV. So that is also our next agenda, that we are going to sit down with all these sectors that are responsible and do a comprehensive response plan for vulnerable populations, youth, and children in the ESC. So I think my 5 minutes are over. I'll stop there and I'll keep listening to the rest of the presenters. We are sorry we didn't participate in the first and second webinars, but we are very privileged to participate in this one, and probably we shall keep engaging through the different partners and together with the African Union, ILO, HelpAge, and all the partners that are in this initiative. We hope to work closely together. Thank you very much. Sorry, I stopped my video because it was affecting my internet, but I'm happy to, and I hope that You heard me very well and hope to engage more. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tayebwa. Sorry I couldn't get you earlier on. The learning curve is apparently a bit long. Okay, in order not to take more time, thank you very much for trying to keep to the time, Mr. Tayebwa. Let me go up to the top of the list and find out if Dr. Owusu-Amankwah from Ghana is now online. Is Dr. Amankwah online?
No,
If
she's not online.
She's not online. In that, back down to Madam Twea from Malawi, if she's online.
Yes, I'm online. Thank you very much. Thank you for the introduction.
Okay, please proceed. Thank you very much.
Okay, I think I might also turn off my video if that's affecting my connection. But this is Pakwanja, where I work with the Ministry of Health in Malawi. I'm an economist there. So I will structure my 5 minutes by starting with the health side of social protection and try to move to the general side of it. So with the health sector in Malawi, our mandate is to ensure that every Malawian has access to health care commensurate with their level of need, and in accordance with international standards of care. And so I think the coming in of this COVID really just added to that agenda, in the sense that we are not considering it a special disease, but rather it's treated as every other disease, in the sense that every Malawian is entitled to healthcare in the same. So if we look at our overall mandate as an economy, we are trying to ensure that we alleviate the burden caused by ill health and reduce the direct and indirect costs of health of healthcare seeking for the entire population. So we have tried to do that. With the first wave of COVID, we didn't have a lot of cases, particularly the severe cases. So we didn't have as many issues as we've had with the second wave, in which we had our health systems was overwhelmed. But in that case, what the government did was to set up treatment units. Initially, they were set up in the 4 cities, but eventually expanded to every district. These were provided healthcare free of charge for COVID-19 severe patients to everyone who had need. And I think at the peak of the second wave, we actually had to open up field hospitals. So I think in the sense of health social protection, I think we tried to ensure that everyone who needed healthcare received it free of charge for all of the components of care, while there were still private treatment units, but these were optional to those who could afford to pay for the care. Now, in terms of the general social protection agenda for the government, that's enshrined in the Malawi National Social Support Policy, which is operationalized by the strategic plan, which is called the National Social Support Program. So that program, the Malawi National Social Support Program, has 5 pillars, looking at consumption support, ensuring resilient livelihoods, shock-sensitive social protection, linkages, as well as system strengthening. So I think if we're looking at shock-sensitive social protection, we are looking at preparing for and responding to unpredictable shocks, such as COVID-19 has been. And so we work in cooperation with the humanitarian sector to ensure that this has been done. So I will talk also a bit about the interventions that were implemented, particularly social protection interventions implemented during COVID-19. The first of which was the COVID-19 urban cash transfer interventions, which we tried to ensure that with the laws that were coming in effect at the time, the lockdown laws, that we don't have, we try to build resilience in the population by giving them cash transfers for a period of 3 months, and that was made available to about 172,000 beneficiaries across the country. But we also tried to top up the amounts that were made available through the regular cash transfer program, and added new beneficiaries to ensure that there are more people that are benefiting from this. We also have currently already have a public works program, which is ongoing, but we have just enhanced it and ensured that we kept it going to ensure that the communities can maintain the assets already made available, which builds their resilience, but also helps us with conservation efforts on the environment. We also had a school works program, school meals program rather, which aimed at providing meals and cash to parents to make sure that they're able to prepare meals for their children and able to provide meals for their children during the pandemic. So I hope I'm still within my 5 minutes, but I'll stop there. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Ms. Twea. No, you were fairly within the 5-minute limit, just a little over. Thank you very much for your effort. We really appreciate your presentation. And just to remind the participants, I might have missed it somewhere in between, to say that we try as much as possible to steer towards any visions that have started emerging in all the countries. Of course, all countries are confronting this problem. If I missed that aspect, I'm so my apologies, but just to remind ourselves that we need to steer towards the visions that are emerging. Okay, thank you, Ms. Twea. Now we move on to Ms. Sheila Nkunika, Senior Social Protection Specialist from Save the Children, Nigeria. Please, Mrs. Nkunika, if you may proceed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Simon, and thank you very much, everyone. I'm glad to be joining you today. As Simon said, I am Sheila Nkunika, Senior Social Protection Specialist from Save the Children, Nigeria. I will be sharing on the need to increase investments on social protection for children.
Mm-hmm.
So allow me to just share my screen now. So we have listened before to what some of the countries are already doing. We listened to Oumar also about some of the commitments that are being made at regional level through the AU. So my presentation today will focus on a specific case for increasing these particular investments and these commitments around children. So when we talk about children, there are several aspects that we keep in mind as it relates to poverty and social protection. Of course, we know from the statistics that children make up more than half of the world's poor, and children also, in sub-Saharan Africa alone, they are really the largest. So they make up about half of these very poor children. Now, this situation of poverty and children has been worsened by COVID-19. As we can already see in 2019, before the pandemic, there was around 585 million children that were living in poverty. And now as we move beyond COVID-19, we have close to 700 plus million children that are in poverty. And in the sub-Saharan region of Africa, we have about 25 million more children that have just entered poverty. What this means is that already we had a huge burden of very poor children. And now, in addition to that burden, we have about 25 million more additional children. And this is likely to get worse if action is not taken by governments and different partners. Now, we talk about investing in children and social protection for children. This is already something that has come up through various commitments. If we look at the UN Convention on the Rights of Children in Article 26, it talks about the right to benefit from social security for children. In Article 27, it talks about an adequate standard of living for children. And even in the African Charter on the Rights and Welfare of Children, there is a specific mention about what state parties should do, and that is to ensure to the maximum extent possible the survival, protection, and development of children. So these commitments are already enshrined in various frameworks, both at national and also international level. And in some countries, actually, they do have legislation around social protection. Now, even with these frameworks that we have, from the very recent dashboard and analysis from the ILO, we find that it's only about 16% of programs, children, only 16% of children in Africa are covered. And if you move down into the sub-region, this even becomes smaller to about 31.1% in the sub-Saharan region, where we have children accessing child or family benefits. And looking now at the COVID-19 response, out of 230 social protection measures that responded to COVID-19, only around 7.6 were focused on issues affecting children and their families. So this really shows us that there is a critical gap that needs to be met in terms of child-sensitive social protection. Now, when we talk about prioritizing children, why is there emphasis on prioritizing children? A big part of it is that childhood is a period in life where we see the biggest return on investment. So whatever type of investment is put in, whether education, whether health, whether social protection, that is where we see the biggest return on investments. Another thing is that poverty, the impacts of poverty in childhood are irreversible. And what we see is that even in future, children that grow up in poor households are expected to actually earn less and to contribute less to the economy. So this issue around the investment of children is really about the long-term trajectory and also the long-term benefits to society and also to children. There's really a very high rate of return on investments when we talk about children. And that is one of the key reasons that investing in children is very important. Another key reason is the fact that I mentioned about the irreversible impact of not investing. So if a child is stunted now, if a child does not receive schooling now, then we expect that the future of this child will be bleak. And in addition to that, we expect that this child will have children that will also go through the same trajectory of life. So that makes a very strong case for investing in children. Now, protection is also part of the key investments in human capital development. I think there's already a lot of arguments around health. There's a lot of arguments around education and other social services. But social protection is a key component of this. Why is that so? Because even if we build education institutions, even if we increase supply of books, even if the quality is increased, there's always a segment of the population that will not be able to access this education and health. So social protection ensures that it lowers economic barriers to services such as education and health. And also social protection creates relevant linkages and can help to stimulate certain behaviors and can help to ensure that children from certain households are linked up to very key important services. Now, whilst we've seen very good investments in health and education, there still remains a very limited investment in social protection. And that's why it's looking at it also as we continue to invest in other sectors like health and education. Now, we've been speaking about social protection for children, so child-sensitive social protection. When we mention child-sensitive social protection, this does not imply specifically social protection targeted at children. So that one is about child-focused social protection. When we mention child-sensitive social protection, this refers to the extent to which social protection interventions can really have beneficial outcomes for children. We have already seen from evidence and from previous presentations that, for instance, old age pensions that are given to older persons can have a very strong impact on children. So this is what we mean by child sensitivity. These programs that are being implemented may be family benefits. How do they benefit the child in that household? We've seen also from evidence, for example, around public works, that in some cases, depending on how these programs are implemented and designed, they can have adverse effects on children. So it's important to keep that in mind when we talk about child-sensitive and child-focused programs. And this is more a focus on ensuring that the different investments that are being spoken about by countries, different commitments that are being made at regional level through the AU, as much as possible become sensitive to those outcomes, needs, and specific issues that affect children. Now, beyond that, we can already see that the right to social protection is already coming up, particularly for children, in the protocol by the AU on the rights of citizens to social protection and social security. So Article 3 talks about how every citizen has the right to social protection. But beyond that, as you move through the protocol, you found Article 11 that talks about how state parties should ensure that social protection programs are sensitive to the needs of children and contribute to the fulfillment of the rights of children across different aspects, including nationality, registration, birth registration, and an adequate standard of living. So overall, we have all these frameworks that provide for us, but there is need to take urgent actions to ensure that these can be actioned. And now, in the midst of COVID, where we see so many more children becoming vulnerable and poor, it's very important for different countries to look into some of those measures and programs that they have to really see how sensitive they are and how they respond to the specific vulnerabilities that children face. So based on some of the experiences and some of the work that is being done by Save the Children, we're calling on donors and governments and different partners to really focus on expansion of social protection coverage for children and caregivers. As I said, it's actually around 16%. So this is still extremely low. And if we are to really address some of these huge numbers around child poverty, this will be one of the key strategies to invest in. So governments should prioritize investments in children by creating more fiscal space for child-focused social protection, at least aiming around 1% of their GDP. It's important also to start somewhere, and that is why this is being recommended. And governments can aim to progressively move to universal coverage. There's already, I think, a lot of countries that are doing some work, but government partners must ensure that child benefits and programs are responsive to shock. So one way of doing this is through the universal child benefits. So universal child benefits in their fullest form are provisions of regular and unconditional income transfers to caregivers of children from pregnancy up until the 18th birth. So when we talk about this, I think when you think about the number of children in the world, this might sound quite significant and daunting, but there's various ways of getting there. There are different ways of getting to some of these universal child benefits and different places to start. So for some countries that do not have this, they could start maybe around the earliest years. Where are the earliest years? There are countries where we've had governments provide benefits for children from 0 to 2 years. In some cases, we can start in areas where we see the highest deprivation, so some form of geographical targeting. These are all options that are available because looking at the numbers of children and young people in most of these countries, they're quite large, but there are various ways that governments can start some of these interventions. For countries that already have programs, what needs to happen now is to look at the coverage gaps. Where are the biggest gaps? Where is it important to come in and plug those gaps? And beyond that, what are the benefits that are being given out? How is inflation or some of these economic challenges affecting these benefits? What does this mean for children? So there are various paths to these universal child benefits. An important part is to start now, to start as soon as possible, to start as large or as small as possible, depending on what is available to the government, but with the idea of making this a universally covered scheme. So the important thing about shock responsiveness when we talk about universal child-based benefits is the fact that because they cover such a huge segment of the population, they can reach up to 80 or 60% of households in low-income countries. I think that is more than any other type of benefit that is being given because children are in almost most of these households. You find that by just implementing a universal child benefit, you can reach most of those shock-affected households. And beyond that, because there is a system that provides this regular benefit, there's also less pressure on humanitarian systems and the fact that the investment is now going on to government-owned social protection programs. So these are just some examples of programs in Africa that are being implemented, focused on children. In the country where I work myself, in Nigeria, we have several states that are implementing these programs. For instance, in Jigawa, in Yobe State, where the governments are giving these grants to children below 0 to 2 with aims of reducing malnutrition. The similar programs as a pilot in Mozambique. We have various child grant programs in Namibia and in South Africa. So what it means is Governments within the region are already taking this step. What is important now is to see where these gaps are. For those governments that have not started, where do they start? Because at the end of the day, children are the largest share of poor in Africa. And so with this COVID-19, this is expected to actually go up. So in terms of what support Save the Children provides, I think we have various partnerships with governments, various partnerships with local organizations. We provide support to do piloting, for instance, for child benefits under 2s. We provide support on implementing cash interventions, evidence building. We have child sensitivity analysis, costing and projections. Beyond that, we also try to support systems around policy development, capacity building, and also social protection system strengthening. Supporting also issues around transparency and accountability, civil society participation, and also beneficiary participation. We are supporting a number of countries, including Nigeria, Burkina Faso, Ethiopia, Somalia, Kenya, Malawi, Sudan, and Zambia.
Sorry to interrupt, Sheila. I think time is running out. If you could please bring it to close.
That's my last slide.
Thank you very much.
So thank you very much, Simon. So on to my last slide. I think at the end of the day, what needs to be a key message for us is that child poverty is lifelong and has very long impacts that can damage the child and also leads to the intergenerational transfer of poverty. Then child-sensitive and child-focused social protection programs are proven tools to address child poverty. And at the end of the day, when we look about investments in children, it's an investment more in human capital, it's an investment more in the economy. So it's not really money that's just going away, but money that is being invested for future benefits to the country. And I think a key message coming from this presentation is just to urge governments to improve coverage and impacts for children in their social protection systems. So whatever is existing, what can we do to make it the most benefit for children? And we need to start where we can, as soon, as large or as small as possible. And already we have various countries that are doing this, and this is an opportunity for different countries to learn from each other. Simon, I'll end my presentation there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sheila, for your presentation. I think when it comes to the Q&A, you'll find a question which probably a few people or some of the participants are going to benefit from in terms of your response. Of course, the predictability of programs that take care of children is not in doubt. Let me just say that before we get to the questions. Thank you very much, Sheila. Let's go to the next presenter, which is Dr. Pam Bamu, Regional Coordinator for Africa in the organization called Women in Informal Employment, Globalizing and Organizing. Sometimes I feel like it probably should be a globalizing and organizing women in informal employment. So, Ms. Bamu, could you please proceed with your presentation? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Nongo. Good morning, everyone. Pamidza is my name, and I'm with WIGO, and I'm going to share a little bit about our thoughts on making rights-based social protection a reality for informal workers, with a few lessons from a study we've been doing in African countries. Just to give a brief overview, we talk a lot about policy, but we've come across some interesting court decisions in the last year that we thought maybe highlight a few things about rights-based social protection. So I'll share about that, what we learned from these decisions and whether there's room for court challenges. And I'll touch briefly on the AU draft social protection protocol and some recommendations. So the first of the decisions comes from Malawi. It was a decision challenging the lockdown provisions. And one of the grounds was about lack of adequate social protection. And in that case, the court recognized the rights to social security, life, and so on. So it was one of the considerations, but not the main consideration for the invalidation of the original lockdown provisions. The second case in Uganda, there was a center, a human rights center, that argued for that the government had failed to issue adequate guidance and to establish reserves, and they were arguing on the basis of the right to food. And there the court talked about adequate measures being in place. The third is from my home country, Zimbabwe, where a gentleman called Mr. Makoka was arguing that he hadn't received any relief after applying, and he was seeking a government order, an order that the government should issue regulations to regulate relief measures so that people like himself, an informal worker, would be able to have food and so on. And on this, the court argued that the existing social assistance measures that were in place in terms of the Social Welfare Assistance Act were adequate. Another interesting decision from South Africa involved a center which deals with migrant workers, and some of them were special permit holders from Zimbabwe and other countries, and asylum seekers, and they were excluded from the COVID relief grant. And they argued that, you know, there was a violation of their rights to social protection, equality, and dignity. And the court actually held that migrants of these categories should be included there. And then the fifth case is also from South Africa. And this was not a COVID specific case. This was a case that had been instituted before, but it dealt with the exclusion of domestic workers from the compensation fund in terms of the Compensation for Occupational Injuries and Diseases Act. And the union, you know, based the argument on the rights to social protection, equality, and dignity. And the court in that case held that this law that excluded domestic workers was unconstitutional and invalid. There was no rational basis for excluding these workers. So there's just a picture of a waste picker in South Africa. So what do we learn about these decisions? I think that we talk a lot about policy, but very often we haven't looked into how to actually implement those rights and whether there are possibilities to force the implementation of the rights. And I think these court decisions really point to the fact that the courts are recognizing, even though the decisions were not based on this right in some cases, but social protection itself is being recognized as a right. And in these decisions, there's growing recognition of the regional and international obligations to provide social protection, including to unconventional, workers who are not conventionally covered by social protection. And there's the recognition that constitutions, national constitutions, expressly and in some cases implicitly recognize this right to social protection. We saw that in Malawi, where they drew on some of the constitutional principles to actually interpret it to include the right to social protection. And the recognition is that everyone requires social protection, and there's a recognition around self-employed workers in particular who have often been excluded, particularly from social insurance. And most of these cases, except the Mahlangu case in South Africa, relate to the COVID-19 crisis, but these rights and obligations apply regardless. So is there room actually where these rights were not always necessarily at the forefront of this litigation? Is there room for us to actually bring these challenges where they are people in circumstances that have lost out as a result of the exclusion from social protection? So in terms of social protection insurance, often membership is restricted to employees as opposed to everyone in terms of the human rights language, and certain categories such as domestic workers are excluded. So there might be room to argue that exclusion of different categories of workers, exclusion of informal workers, violates their rights to social protection, equality, and dignity, and for the invalidity of the provisions that specifically exclude them. And another issue also is around failure to adapt and to ensure that in reality, the informal workers can participate in these in these schemes. So failure to adapt the rules, you know, is it possible? I think there could be arguments for approaching the courts to actually effect adaptations that allow workers to participate. And there are some examples in terms of registration requirements, contributions, payment methods, and a government or other parties' co-contribution. So the challenge maybe might relate to whether such inclusions impose costs on governments. And I'll touch on this when we talk about social insurance. Okay, so they are self-employed street vendors in Ghana. And then the issue of social assistance. Oftentimes, the workers are not directly excluded. Informal workers are often excluded by virtue of income thresholds or by virtue of the fact that these schemes focus on non-working people. So they're often too rich to benefit or too poor but they're also too poor to meet their basic subsistence. So they do need some form of assistance. And one could argue that if social protection, the right to social protection is so broad and it applies to everyone, there could be room or grounds to argue that governments should increase thresholds. So court challenges to say there should be measures to increase the thresholds for entry into the social protection programs, to extend universal benefits, or to provide for basic income grants so that there's greater coverage of informal workers. But the problem or the challenge that I alluded to earlier is this issue that these socioeconomic rights are framed within a context where there is a room for governments to argue that they don't have available resources, that they're still trying to progressively realize these rights where there are cost implications. And in many cases, the courts, because of the separation of powers, are a little bit reluctant to stipulate how government should extend social assistance particularly, or to critique existing measures, although we see in the Mahlangu case that, you know, costs were considered, what it would mean to compensate domestic workers even who had suffered previously. And still the court went ahead and ordered that there should be liability for domestic workers. So there is some room to argue that, you know, there might be debates around the costs and where the court steps in. And sometimes the courts are not keen to critique existing measures. We saw that in Malawi, in South Africa, in Zimbabwe, sorry, and we saw it in Uganda, where the court said, well, there's something in place and that's good enough, without really interrogating it. So we have this draft AU Social Protection Protocol, which is really an excellent instrument for us as Africa, because social protection has been dealt with either in non-binding instruments or in relation to certain categories of people, such as women, such as children, but this is a broader and comprehensive and binding instrument that brings this together. And some of the things that it talks about are representation of informal workers' organizations in discussion about designing and implementing schemes. And it talks especially about inclusion, but also adaptation, because to just say they're allowed without actually adapting doesn't take one far. So there are different suggestions as to how to do that. And then there's also talk about a minimum social protection package or a minimum social protection floor, and specific reference to women in the informal economy, and especially extending maternity and health protection. And other issues also relating to access to markets, progressive formalization, and the protection of informal workers' income. So in terms of the recommendations, I think one of the things that we have to acknowledge is that paid employment in the formal sector is only a small proportion. I think we are talking 10 to 25% in most African countries. And if we look particularly at the informal sector, for example, 59.2% of non-agricultural workers are actually outside of, in the informal sector, and the majority are self-employed, and there are other categories of workers who are unprotected, like domestic workers. So there is an urgent need to actually make sure that social protection extends to cover workers outside the formal economy. And we've had some developments that I can't go into as a result of COVID, where some countries are actually realizing the need to change their social protection systems and in response to COVID specifically, but not many of them have been very rooted in law. So not enough has actually changed to bring the informal workers within this. For informal worker organizations, you know, it's really the call to say nothing about us without us. So their participation is critical. As trade unions, it's important that they advocate for and facilitate the representation of informal workers in social dialogue. Governments should be increasing spending on social protection, and civil society should be promoting the visibility of informal workers and working on advocacy on the alignment of laws. And researchers like myself and Laura and others, you know, we need to be identifying the gaps and making the recommendations for alignment. I'll leave it at that.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Just on the, you were saved by the bell. Thank you very much. Very interesting presentation. I was encouraged when I saw us reach the recommendations, which do have elements of a vision that could, or rather visions, that are going to assist us in overcoming any potential difficulties from similar experiences like COVID-19. Thank you very much, Dr. Pamu. Now let's move to the next presenter. This is Madam Carol Agengo from the from HelpAge International, the Africa Regional Representative. Please, may you proceed, and of course, taking note that our time is becoming rather limited. Thank you very much. Your time, Madam Agengo.
Thank you very much, Simon. With your permission, I'd like to split my time with Dr. Rita, who has now joined. And so I will speak to 2 issues only. So if Rita is able to use the remaining part of my 5 minutes, I think it would be brilliant. I think a lot has been said about the consequences of lack of social protection. And I want to suggest to us that we need to shift and pivot a little more towards the causes. And I want to speak very quickly to just the correlation between poverty, poor governance, the vulnerability, and the inequalities. And I'll quickly move on to what I think are some of the recommendations that we can pick on. One is that we must begin to tackle the issue of lack of social protection from a structural perspective. And we need to therefore elevate social protection beyond the service delivery angle that it takes of providing cash transfers or relief food, etc. We need to go to the root of the causes of inequality, poverty, and marginalization. And I want to suggest that part of the ways we can do this is to have actual intersectional engagements between what you term in the African Union setting as the software and the hardware. And by the software, I'm looking at issues that are more symptomatic, response to conflict, etc. But if we go to the hardware, we look at issues of governance, issues that go to how states govern, which then look at issues of investment in education, health, governance systems that then would go to the root cause of poverty. Africa is very wealthy, but poor governance is taking us down the poverty pathway, and hence our problems with the social protection. The second issue that I'd like to speak about in terms of still intersectionality is to look at issues such as climate change and conflict, which are symptomatic of the deeper governance issue, but to look at social protection from the framing, not only of the response, but also in terms of the management and the prevention, so that we're looking at social protection, both upstream and downstream. And I think my sister from Nigeria spoke very well about the issues of children and the education. I'm speaking from the other end, working with older people who have suffered the consequences of lifelong neglect of social protection. But we need to look at it from building it within our structures so that that child that my sister spoke about does not then suffer those consequences when she crosses over and becomes part of my target group. at HelpAge. And then the third thing is to also look at culture, go back to the cultures that safeguarded communities. When we speak about negotiating contracts or negotiating protocols at the African Union, the trump card that governments play is culture. But why are we not tapping into that culture to bring about social protection? And then finally, look at data that is emerging from the totality of the engagements that we've spoken about to then inform what I still say is the core of what will bring about a shift in social protection, the drivers of vulnerability, which is poor governance that leads to conflict, that then leads to poverty. I'd like to end it there. I can share with you a copy of these thoughts, but I'd really like to give Dr. Rita a chance to speak to us about what they're doing in Ghana around social protection. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Carol.
Thank you very much, Carol. I really particularly appreciate keeping your promise to share some of your time with Dr. Rita. And let me ask Dr. Rita Amankwah to get right in and make her presentation. Most welcome, Dr. Rita.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Carol, for being so kind to me. Social protection in Ghana has gone through a lot of progress. It started in 2008. We have done a lot of things, including developing and implementing cash transfers. We call it LEAP. LEAP is Livelihood Empowerment Against Poverty. So from starting in 2008, from 1,645 households in 2008, currently we have 334,000 households, translating to 1.5 million people. We also have Ghana School Feeding. Ghana School Feeding is also feeding peoples in deprived areas. Currently we are around about let me say over 40,000 children are being fed every day when schools are in session. We also have the health insurance scheme. The health insurance scheme, we have the non-contributory part of health insurance scheme, where we also register people for free, especially the aged and children. And if you are a beneficiary of LEAP, you of course be automatic beneficiary of the health insurance scheme, where we give health care for free. We also have the capitation grants, school capitation grant, where school is free in Ghana now from KG. In Ghana, from KG up to the secondary school, education is virtually free. So everybody can access education for free. And so these are 5 key flagship programs that Ghana is implementing. We are also trying to improve, and let me say that in 2016, Ghana developed the social protection policy. So we are implementing the social protection policy as at now. This is to improve coordination of social protection in the country. And through that, we are strengthening systems. We are putting in place systems that will help us to really coordinate social protection in a very effective and sustainable manner. And so we have set up what we call the Ghana Household Registry that is trying to do a nationwide register on vulnerable people. And so we have done it in 6 regions in the north. We are gradually scaling up the GNHR, that's how we call it, the Ghana National Household Registry. We have also set up a monitoring evaluation MIS system that is also supporting us to effectively coordinate and putting together the information for policy makers, and also for communication with our clients and with our stakeholders. We have also set up what we call the Unified Case Management System. The Unified Case Management System is a web-based system that is trying to connect all the key programs that I mentioned, and also improve the case management of social protection. This is just to reduce any corruption that we may identify, so that citizens, wherever you are in the country, we have a call center with toll-free line that you can call anywhere in the country to register your grievances, and you give you a specific a key a duration where we will follow it through and make sure that you get answers to your questions and issues or queries. And so we are putting in place systems, and these systems are far advanced and are working. That is helping us to better coordinate social protection. We are also we are completing a bill, social protection bill. We hope to submit the bill to Cabinet this year and subsequently to Parliament for consideration. This will give legal backing to social protection interventions in the country. I've already mentioned the free senior high school that was recently introduced in 2017, and it's given a lot of opportunities for people who previously wouldn't have, access secondary education, for accessing secondary education. We have also mother-child care, where if you're a pregnant mother, you can access healthcare for free. All these are social protection systems that we have put in place in the country that is helping us to reach as many people as possible. Let me mention the fact that we have one key challenge for us is financial sustainability. The government is gradually and over the years has increased its support to social protection. But we have also support from donor agencies, the World Bank, DFID, the World Food Programme, UNICEF, and other support that we get from donor agencies. So what we are trying to do in Ghana is to sort of increase government's own support whilst we reduce donor support. But it's becoming a challenge. We have, last year we did fiscal gap analysis to ascertain what really are the gaps, what we need to do in order to reach the goal of having sustainable funding for Ghana. And so that has been done. The information is being shared at higher level. In fact, we've planned a high level dialogue with high-level people in the country to discuss this and make sure that they understand the issues and are able to support us and increase physical space for social protection. So a lot are being done, not forgetting gender mainstreaming. We make sure that all these programs are gender sensitive. For instance, the LEAP has targeted 60%, in fact, 60% of LEAP beneficiaries are women and women-headed households. And so we are working very much together to make sure that we reach as many people as possible. And so because of time, I think Caron took some, I have also taken some. So I will end here. If there's any question, I will come back and answer. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rita, for taking into account the time, but all the same, thank you very much for your very enlightening presentation and keeping to time. I'm sure a number of issues will come up in the Q&A, but we are running out of time. This is why I'm trying to rush through to the extent possible. Now, let me call upon Signor Sergio Falange, excuse me, Executive Director of the Mozambique social protection platform. Mr. Pakwanja, could you please take the floor? Thank you.
Thank you, Simon. Good afternoon, everyone. I know that I have a pressure with the time. I'll try to go straight to the point.
Great.
So we can, I can keep the 5 minutes. Let me try to share my presentation. Okay. Okay. My name is Pakwanja, as I said. I'm the executive director from the Mozambican Civil Society platform. So I want to go straight to the point, talking about the CSO, the efforts to expand social protection in Africa. I've raised here 3 priorities that I would like to share with you that we can discuss together. The first one is the political will and cross-sector coordination, because we think as a CSO that it's very important to end strategy and the collective efforts to expand social protection needs the commitment of the states and the political will of the governments in terms of policies, strategy, and the budgets, and a multi-sectorial approach to lead to more efficient and effective responses. The second priority is in terms of regional and national response. It's very important to have a regional framework and a strategy that could be translated to national policies and programs and builds an existing social protection law and programs and mechanisms to allow for rapid adaptation of programs and more sustainable responses. The third one is a strategic partnership and funding. The contribution from the civil society organization and the commitment and support of the cooperation partners that bring to the table evidence-based information, reflections for immediate solution, as well as a support to implementation or monitoring funding. It's very crucial in these efforts from the civil society. The fundamental role of civil society following COVID, the CSO must be the driver of change. We have been discussing this a lot, and we know that the CSOs have a very important role to play in this instance. So the CSO must be the driver of change in the post-COVID-19 society and economies, particularly regarding thinking our growth and government's models, and to balance economic perspective with social inclusion, human capital, sustainable, and well-being. So the work of CSO following the COVID-19 should focus to guarantee, first, effective policies cohesion and meaningful involvement of citizens, the human rights-based holistic and integrated approach to policy making, solutions and intervention that values the well-being of people, the bottom-up initiatives which respect the opinions and the right of the citizens, and elaborating new form of solidarity and social activism and more inclusive, just, sustainable, and democratic society. The efforts and plans to expand social protection in Africa, the CSO are fundamental in building the right basics past coronavirus worlds. With this crisis of COVID-19, there's a need for a urgent and comprehensive public debate and transparent consultation on exit strategy and recovery measures that can lead to more inclusive, just, sustainable, and democratic societies, and the participation of civil society in this process will be very fundamental.
Sorry, Sergio, I'm advised by the Secretariat. Sergio, yes. I'm advised by the Secretariat that we are running out of time.
So
and
will be my last presentation.
Thank you very much.
Okay. So now I think that it's time to empower the CSO in terms of resource, the digital skill, technology, to collaborate with the community and policymakers to solve a long-standing challenge in social protection. So the pandemic has exposed many inequalities. CSO already work on the front line of issues related to discrimination, structural inequality, and justice, lack of access to the basic services. So, and can continue to play an important role in issues during the following COVID-19. So the CSO are already playing a remarkable role on social protection during the pandemic and providing necessary guidance on the protection and promotion of human rights, documenting, monitoring and tracking compliance advocates for policy change, and urging government to fulfill their obligation and providing service. So I think that maybe Simon, you can share in the end of this presentation with the colleagues. I'm pressured with the time, but I think this is a brief that I would like to share with the audience about what will be the efforts and the plan to advance social protection. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sergio. And that was a very good presentation with lots of elements on the vision side. Thank you very much. Now, for the Q&A, very quickly, I hope the Secretariat will allow us to go into the Q&A session. May I hand over to Dr. Laura Alphas to moderate on this section. Again, very briefly, because we are short of time.
There's no time for Q&A.
Oh, no time for Q&A.
There won't be any time.
Okay. Now, can I then ask Mr. Sabelo Mbokazi to close on our behalf? Hello, Secretariat. Hello. Are we completely closed? Hello.
Simon, I think you need to close because we're running very over time now.
Okay, it looks like we are forced to close. Our time has elapsed. And my hope is that we can share the documents that are not available, including the Q&A and also other summaries that we're expecting. Thank you very much. It was a very stimulating and productive session, only apart from the problem of time. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye, everyone.